In this video, we're going to talk about another type of graph that derives from a frequency table, and that's called a frequency polygon. These graphs show class midpoints versus frequency, as opposed to class limits or class boundaries versus frequency. You'll notice that these, just like our last types of graphs, are for quantitative data. For our example, let's go ahead and go back up to the data we used in our last example. So I'm just going to copy this chart, the one we used for our histogram, because frequency polygons are related to that same type of table. So looking at our how-to list for our example, it says, if not provided, create a frequency table. We've done that in a previous example. And then it says, calculate the class midpoints. You will need a midpoint that is one below the last row in your table. So I'll need a midpoint for the class that doesn't exist down here, and I'll need one for the class that doesn't exist up here. And that has to do with the shape that we want our graph to take, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. So let's go ahead and erase our side notes from our last example and add some information about midpoints here. So midpoints are halfway between the class limits of the row. So for that first row, I want a number between 1 and 2. That's going to be 1.5. I want a number between 3 and 4. That's going to be 3.5. Between 5 and 6 is 5.5. And you'll notice again, just like we saw with class boundaries, just like we saw with the class limits, that gap is our class width of 2 from when we built this table. So I know my next number is going to be 7.5, 9.5, and the one extra row beneath the table is going to be 11.5. The one extra row before the table is going to be negative 0.5. Because if I subtract 2 from 1.5, I end up at negative 0.5. When I plot, I am plotting my midpoints on the x and my frequency on the y. So midpoint versus frequency. So let's go ahead and construct our axes. I know I need to go from negative 0.5 to 11.5. So negative 0, 1.5, 3.5, 5.5, 7.5, 9.5, 11.5. That's good. I don't know why I'm having a brain fart here. My y-axis, I'm going from 0 to 8, same as I was before. So let's scoochy this over a little bit. And then I want to go from 0 to 8. So 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm going to label so I know this axis are midpoints. And again, that y-axis is frequency. And then my next step is to scale those axes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And then negative 0.5, 1.5, 3.5, all the way down. My next step, step 4, says plot the points, frequency. Oh my gosh, Mr. J. Plot the points, midpoint, comma, frequency. So x, comma, y. So we're treating them as ordered pairs. And you'll notice my first midpoint doesn't have a corresponding frequency. There is no data at negative 0.5 because all my data was positive. So the frequency that goes with that first midpoint is 0. I don't have any data there. Likewise, the midpoint 11.5 wasn't originally in my table. My biggest data point's 10. There is no data at 11.5. So that frequency should also be 0. The start and end of frequency polygons should sit on the x-axis, because that first and last point should correspond with a number that wasn't originally in our data set. We're going to go ahead and do the ones that are, starting with 1.5 and 3. And then we had 3.5 and 5. And then we had 5.5 and 3, 7.5 and 1, and 9.5 and 8. The fifth step is, now that I have those dots, I'm going to go ahead and play connect the dots, just like we did with a line graph. And what you'll notice as you construct this graph is that it forms a closed figure with respect to the x-axis. I have bounded in an area here between the lines in my frequency polygon and the x-axis. And that's why it's called a frequency polygon. Polygons are closed shapes formed by straight edges. And that's exactly what we've built in this graph. I'm going to scroll back a little bit because you'll notice the overall shape, a smaller peak followed by a sharp, steeper peak, is something similar to what we saw in our histogram. A smaller peak followed by a much sharper peak. So both histograms and frequency polygons give us the same shape, just in slightly different ways. All right, if you have any questions on what you've seen in the graph, feel free to send me an email or drop by office hours. Otherwise, I will see you in our next video.